All right, so today we're gonna dive into something.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's
Yeah.
a fascinating topic, but it's really tough to wrap your head around.
Absolutely.
And that is the suffering of children.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, we're looking at it from a philosophical and a theological perspective,
Right.
which sounds very heavy, I know.
Yes,
But trust me, it gets very interesting.
it certainly does.
Yeah, we're working with some excerpts from Abla Hasan's book on pain and suffering.
And they're a perfect starting point for this deep dive, I think.
Yeah, her take on this whole issue of suffering really kind of caught my attention because she doesn't just see it as punishment for sin, like a lot of traditional interpretations do.
Yeah.
She's linking it to this idea of inherent divinity, which really kind of blew my mind a little bit, honestly.
It's a powerful concept,
Yeah.
and it challenges a lot of conventional thinking about suffering.
Absolutely.
So I'm ready to break this down.
Yeah, let's do it.
How do we even begin with this?
Yeah.
Maybe with the most basic question.
Yeah, like
Why do children suffer?
Exactly. It feels so unfair.
Yeah.
Just inherently unfair, right?
Right.
And Hasan actually kicks things off by bringing up Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that scene where Ivan is kind of wrestling with this very question?
Of course.
Yeah.
Ivan throws down this gauntlet, and he says, why should a child suffer
Right.
if it's all supposed to lead to some kind of eternal harmony?
Yeah.
And he points out their innocence,
Yeah.
that they haven't eaten the apple
Yeah.
of knowledge of good and evil,
Right.
like adults.
Right. And that's what makes it so difficult to reconcile, you know?
Yeah.
How
That
can...
they haven't even had the chance to understand good and evil.
Exactly. How can they be held accountable for something they
Yeah.
haven't even had a chance to
Right.
understand yet?
It's a question that's plagued theologians and philosophers for centuries.
For sure.
Now, Hasan jumps into the fray, and she's got a bold claim.
Yeah.
She says suffering isn't about punishment at all.
Okay.
It's a test.
Interesting.
Okay? And it's a test that's directly tied to our divine nature.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where it gets wild.
Okay.
This test works differently for children.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
So like a test is a test, right?
Well, not according to Hasan.
Okay.
She argues that adults,
Mm-hmm.
we can actually fail this divine test.
Okay.
We have free will.
Yeah.
We make choices.
Yeah.
And those choices have consequences.
Right.
But children,
Yeah.
they're exempt from all that.
Really?
They still experience suffering, yes.
Okay.
But it's not about punishment for their actions.
Whoa.
It's something they endure
Okay.
and something they're ultimately rewarded for.
So you're saying that for children, suffering is like a guaranteed path to reward in the afterlife.
Yeah, it's not a test they can fail.
It's not even a test.
Right. That's the crux of her argument.
Wow.
And to back this up, she brings in a passage from the Quran, specifically 81.113,
Right.
which paints this picture of the Day of Judgment.
Okay.
It's a very vivid picture.
So what's so special about that passage?
Well, it describes how even infants who are victims of infanticide
Wow.
will have their voices heard
Wow.
and justice will be served.
That's powerful.
Imagine that.
Huh.
The most vulnerable beings imaginable.
Yeah.
And she uses this
Mm-hmm.
to argue that the suffering children experience in this life
Right.
isn't just,
Some random hardship.
random hardship they have to endure before reaching paradise.
Right.
It's directly tied to their ultimate reward.
So their suffering is part of their eventual happiness.
Yeah, it's not just a prelude. It's part of the main event.
Wow.
So that leads us to another key piece of her argument,
Okay.
the divine nature of children's souls.
Right.
And she dives into this concept of nafs.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as the very essence of a person, the spark of the divine that exists in each of us.
Right.
From the moment we're created. It's what connects us to a higher power.
Right.
And it's present in both adults and children from the very beginning.
So are you saying that
Yeah.
from the Quran's perspective,
Yes.
that children are born with this divine spark just like adults?
That's exactly what she's arguing.
There's no difference.
No.
Interesting.
She points to verses that emphasize that all nafs will be gathered
Mm-hmm.
and resurrected,
Okay.
indicating that children have the same spiritual status
Right.
as adults.
Wow.
They're equally deserving of justice
Right.
and, as we've been discussing, reward.
That's a powerful statement about the inherent value and worth of every child.
Right.
It's not about age or experience.
yeah.
It's about their soul.
It's about their souls.
Yeah.
And
And it's just as important as ours.
get this,
Okay.
she even highlights a verse where an infant girl who is buried alive
Oh, wow.
A truly horrific act
Yeah.
is giving a voice in the afterlife.
Wow.
This suggests that
So they don't enter the afterlife as
they,
some kind of spiritual minor.
no, they're fully developed beings.
That's a striking image.
It is.
Because it really drives home the point that
Yeah.
in the eyes of God, every soul matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you might be wondering, if children are inherently innocent
Right.
and their souls are so precious,
Yeah.
why should they suffer at all?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Hasan acknowledges this potential counter-argument.
Okay, so how does she address that?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
that
Yeah.
seems like a pretty big contradiction.
Well, her rebuttal is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
You see, in her framework, all humans are considered innocent at their core.
Okay.
We start our journey as divine deputies,
Mm-hmm.
not sinners.
Right. So it's not about innocent versus guilty.
It's not about that.
It's about recognizing that we all start from this place of divine potential,
That's right.
regardless of age.
Exactly.
Okay.
And while Islam does exempt children from legal responsibility
Right.
until adulthood,
Yeah.
that's more about practical matters in this earthly life.
Okay.
It doesn't change the fundamental truth about their souls.
Right.
They're sacred, they have inherent worth, and they have the same right to eternal life
Right.
as anyone else.
That's a very nuanced perspective.
I think so.
It acknowledges their vulnerability, but it also affirms
Yeah.
their spiritual equality.
Precisely.
Okay, now to really kind of grasp this, we have to understand what she sees as the source of this divine nature
You're right.
we've been talking about.
Right.
And for that, we have to look at this idea of sharing God's spirit.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
We're talking about that verse in the Quran, 15.29,
Yes.
where God breathes his spirit into humans,
Right.
makes them gods.
Makes them gods.
It's such a powerful image.
It's a powerful image.
And she emphasizes that this applies to all humans,
Yes.
regardless of age.
Regardless of age.
It's not limited to adults who've reached some level of understanding or spiritual maturity.
Exactly.
Yeah, this shared spark is what connects us all.
That shared divine spark.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's what makes us capable of suffering,
Yes.
but also
And experiencing ultimate reward.
experiencing that ultimate reward.
Yeah.
It's like we all have this piece of God within us,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what makes us both vulnerable,
That's right.
but also incredibly powerful.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And she takes this even further
Okay.
by introducing this concept of a pre-existential state for souls.
Okay, now we're getting into some deep
We're going
metaphysical territory here.
Oh, all right.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Pre-existential status.
Well, it's alluded to in the Quran,
Okay.
verse 7.172.
Okay.
Honestly, it's a bit of a mystery.
Okay.
The Quran doesn't give us a ton of detail,
Okay.
but it does suggest that our souls existed in some form before entering our earthly bodies.
Right. Before we were even born.
Right.
Wow.
We don't know much about this state,
Right.
but she uses it to further solidify her point.
Mm-hmm.
Children's souls have the same status as adults, even before birth.
So it's like there's this pre-worldly existence.
Yes.
Where souls, whether they'll eventually inhabit a child
Yeah.
or an adult, are already seen as equals in the eyes of God.
That's right.
It adds another layer to this whole idea of inherent divinity.
It does.
Wow. That's a lot to consider.
A lot to consider.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
And you might be feeling like you need a minute to process all this.
I do. I need to take a walk.
Yeah.
I need to go on a hike and think about this.
Yeah.
But I'm hooked.
Good.
I want to hear more.
Right.
We've only scratched the surface
We've only scratched the surface
of her argument.
And
I'm dying to hear more
Yeah.
about how she connects these ideas to the Quran
okay.
and how it all impacts our understanding of
Yes.
how we should treat and care for children.
All right. Well, you're in luck because we've got a lot more to unpack.
Let's do it.
Get ready to dive even deeper into Hasan's thought-provoking perspective.
Yes.
When we come back
Oh, okay.
for part 2.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
Welcome back. I don't know about you, but my head is still spinning a bit from all these
Right.
mind-blowing ideas
Yeah.
about children and suffering and divinity.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to take in.
It is. It is.
But you know, it's so important to grapple with these questions.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about something as sensitive
Absolutely.
and as profound as the suffering of children.
Absolutely. Before the break, we were talking about this idea of
Yes.
this pre-worldly existence for souls.
Right.
that our souls existed in some form before we were even born.
Right.
I mean, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But, you know, as wild as it sounds, it really just reinforces the idea that children's souls are just as significant
Yeah.
as those of adults. You know, even before they enter this world, they have this connection to the divine.
Right. So let's kind of circle back to
Okay.
Hasan's core argument here.
Right.
You know, we've talked about suffering as this test tied to our divine nature.
Right.
But she says that that test plays out differently for children.
Yes.
Can you remind me how that works again?
Okay, so imagine it this way. Adults, having eaten from that tree of knowledge,
Yeah.
can actually fail this divine test.
Okay.
We have free will.
Yeah.
We make choices.
We do.
And those choices have consequences, right?
Right.
But children,
Yeah.
they're not held to the same standard
Oh, interesting.
of accountability.
Okay.
They endure suffering, yes,
Right.
but it's not seen as a result of their actions.
So it's not like they're being punished for doing something wrong. It's more like they're being refined or strengthened through their suffering.
Refined, yeah.
Okay.
Like a diamond being formed under pressure.
Here you go. Perfect analogy.
Hasan's point is that their endurance, their very act of going through these hardships, is a testament to their divine nature.
Okay.
And it's this endurance that ultimately leads to their reward in the afterlife.
Hold on. So you're saying that just the very act of enduring suffering, without even having the capacity to understand it or choose it, is somehow proving the divinity of a child's soul.
Yeah.
That's pretty radical.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It challenges the way we typically think about suffering
Right.
and responsibility, right?
For sure.
And it raises a whole host of questions about how we should care for and support children in this life, knowing that they're going through this profound, almost mystical process.
It makes you wonder if they're exempt from punishment but still deserving of reward for their suffering. Does that change our role as caregivers?
That's the question.
Yeah, should we be trying to shield them from pain? Or is suffering an essential part of their spiritual development?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And honestly, one that Hasan doesn't directly answer in the excerpts that you share, right?
Yeah.
But it's a question worth pondering, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
If suffering is woven into the fabric of their spiritual journey, like you were saying, does that mean that we should just let them suffer?
Right.
Or is it our responsibility to create a safe and loving environment where they can face these challenges without being overwhelmed?
I think that gets at the heart of the dilemma a lot of us face as parents or educators. Anyone who cares for children.
As caregivers,
We want to protect them, but we also want them to grow and learn from their experiences.
Right. And Hasan's work doesn't offer easy answers.
It doesn't, no.
But it does push us to think beyond these simplistic ideas about good and evil.
Right.
Punishment and reward.
Yeah.
And to consider suffering as something more complex.
Right.
Something that can actually reveal the divine spark within us all.
It's a really powerful perspective.
It is.
And, you know, while it is rooted in Islamic theology, I think it speaks to anyone.
I agree.
Who's ever kind of wrestled with this question of why innocent beings suffer, especially children.
Especially children.
Transcends any one religion.
Absolutely.
Or belief system.
It challenges us to see suffering through a different lens.
Yeah.
One that recognizes the inherent worth and potential of every human being.
Regardless of age.
Regardless of age.
I'm really curious to hear more about how Hasan backs up these ideas with specific examples and interpretations from the Quran.
Okay.
We've touched on a few verses.
Right.
But there's got to be more to it, right?
You're right. There is a lot more to explore.
Yeah.
And those specific references really illuminate the depth and the nuance of her thinking.
Okay.
I think it's time we delved into those in more detail.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, we'll take a short break and come back ready to dive into the heart of the Quranic evidence that supports Hasan's powerful arguments.
All right, stay with us. Okay, so we're back and ready to kind of dig into the Quranic roots of this whole discussion about children and suffering and divinity.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how Hasan uses specific verses to support her argument.
Well, you're in for a treat because some of these verses are truly eye-opening.
Okay.
One of the most powerful examples she brings up is the Quranic prohibition against killing any nafs,
Right, that human soul.
That human soul.
Right, the divine spark we've been talking about.
Yeah, and she emphasizes that this prohibition doesn't just apply to adults.
Right.
It covers everyone.
Regardless of age.
Regardless of age. Children, infants, even unborn babies.
Right, right.
And she points to verse 5.32.
Okay.
Which states that if anyone kills a person, unless in retribution for murder or spreading corruption in the land, it is as if he kills all mankind.
Wow.
It's a pretty stark statement, isn't it? It really highlights the sacredness of every human life from the Quran's perspective.
The Quran doesn't mess around.
No, it doesn't.
When it comes to protecting human life.
It doesn't.
Wow.
And Hasan is quick to point out that this absolute prohibition doesn't make exceptions for issues that are often debated in Islamic jurisprudence, like abortion.
Okay.
She argues that based solely on the Quran, there's no such thing as an unwanted or undesired nafs.
Wow.
Every soul, no matter the circumstances of its conception or birth, has this inherent right to life, both in this world and the next.
So the Quran is basically saying every human being, from the moment they exist, has value and deserves to be protected.
That's the essence of it.
Yeah.
And this unwavering emphasis on the worth of every nafs really strengthens Hasan's argument about the divine nature of children's souls.
Right.
If every human life is sacred and worthy of protection, then think about how much more that applies to children with their innocence.
And their vulnerability.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And here's another verse that really drives home this point.
Okay.
6.151.
All right.
It explicitly states, "Do not kill your children, fearing poverty. We will provide for you and for them."
Wow.
This verse directly tackles the issue of infanticide.
Right.
Which, tragically, was practiced in some pre-Islamic societies, often out of economic hardship or cultural biases.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is heartbreaking.
But unfortunately, those kinds of practices still happen today.
They do in some parts of the world, you're right. It's a stark reminder of how far we still have to go.
Yeah.
But the point is, by explicitly forbidding this practice, the Quran is making a powerful statement about the inherent right to life of all children, regardless of their circumstances. They're not burdens, they're blessings.
They're blessings.
Entrusted to our care by a divine provider.
It's really fascinating how Hasan uses all these different verses and concepts from the Quran to build this comprehensive picture of how children are viewed and how their suffering is understood.
She's a master at weaving those threads together, isn't she?
She is. She is.
And she doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
No, she doesn't.
But at the same time, there's this deep respect for the sacred text and the wisdom they hold about human life and the mystery of suffering.
So we've covered a lot the divine nature of children's souls, this absolute prohibition against taking any human life.
Right.
The idea that children's suffering is a test that leads to reward in the afterlife.
Yes.
But what about this whole issue of legal responsibility?
Right.
I'm still a little fuzzy on how that fits into all of this.
Ah, yes, that's a... In Islam, children are exempt from legal responsibility until they reach adulthood.
Okay, which makes sense on a practical level.
Right, exactly.
But how does that square with this idea that they're being tested through suffering? If they're not responsible for their actions, what are they being tested on?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It goes to the heart of her argument.
Okay.
She explains that while children may not be held legally responsible,
okay,
they still possess that same divine nafs as adults.
Right.
And it's this divine spark that subjects them to the test of suffering.
So even though they don't have the same level of understanding or free will as adults, it's their inherent connection to the divine that makes them capable of enduring and growing through suffering.
Exactly. Their suffering isn't a punishment for any wrongdoing.
Right.
It's simply a consequence of their divine nature.
Okay.
And because they're exempt from legal responsibility, their suffering is seen as something they endure purely for the sake of spiritual refinement. And ultimate reward.
It's like they're on a totally different playing field than we are.
Completely different.
They're not being judged or punished.
They're being purified.
They're being purified.
And prepared for something greater.
And prepared for something much greater.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this really highlights how unique Hasan's view of children is.
Right.
They're seen as these incredibly potent spiritual beings undergoing a journey of transformation. that's both beautiful and heartbreaking.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
It has.
I mean, we've explored some really challenging ideas. Yeah. Suffering, divinity, the unique experiences of children. Yeah. It's a lot to process.
It is.
But I feel like we've gained some real insights here.
I agree.
And I think one of the most important takeaways from Hasan's work is that she offers us a new way to think about the suffering of children.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know, she challenges us to move beyond these simplistic notions of punishment and reward.
Right.
And to see their suffering as part of a much grander spiritual journey.
Yes.
One that ultimately leads to their full flourishing in the afterlife.
That's right.
It's a perspective that demands empathy, understanding, and a profound appreciation for the worth and potential of every child.
Absolutely.
And it definitely leaves us with some big questions to ponder.
It does. If children's suffering is so deeply intertwined with their spiritual growth, what does that mean for us as caregivers, as a society?
Right.
How do we balance the need to protect them with the understanding that suffering can be a transformative experience?
Those are questions we all need to wrestle with.
We do.
I don't think there are any easy answers. But I think by engaging with these ideas and continuing to explore the complexities of children's experiences, we can hopefully move towards a more compassionate and insightful understanding of their unique journey.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive for today.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for listening, and we hope this conversation has sparked some new thoughts and inspired you to continue reflecting on these profound questions surrounding the suffering of children.